Okay, so then when we're operationalizing the independent variable here, we will just write type of intervention, and then we would put in the brackets as operationalized or as measured by whether participants engage in systematic desensitization if they're in group 1, the use of benzodiazepines if they're in group 2, or like a placebo treatment if they're in group 3. So that should be how we operationalize that. Then operationalizing the DV should be basically looking at the symptoms that the person is experiencing with reference to phobia, so kind of their fear level. So we can operationalize their symptoms by looking at, how did they measure that? To measure the phobic symptoms, the change in heart rate in beats per minute that occurred before and during the walk. So basically they're looking at the change in heart rate. So that's how we're measuring, because we know that obviously when we're more scared, our heart rate goes up a lot more. So that's how they're showing that. So we would write here, well, open up a text box. We would write here something like, level of fear or phobia symptoms as measured by change in heart rate, beats per minute. I think that's how they did measure that. So that's the DV there, the operationalized DV. Okay, so moving on to the next question. Evaluate the validity of the way that Gemma operationalized her DV. So when we're looking at validity, remember we said validity is this idea that something measures what it's supposed to measure. Yeah, so when we're talking about validity, what we're really talking about is we're evaluating this in terms of whether using heart rate as a measurement for fear or phobia or change in phobic symptoms is actually a good way or an accurate way of measuring the idea of fear. Okay, so we can evaluate, it's only worth 2 marks. So I guess you just need to include like one main point here and describe it. You can talk about the fact that heart rate is an objective measure, or that, heart rate is something that is kind of difficult for you to manipulate yourself. So you can talk about it being objective. You can also talk about it as being a physiological measure, which means that compared to just talking about or describing your fear, it's a lot harder to kind of lie when you're being attached to a heart rate monitor, for example. So it doesn't really have the same disadvantages of a self-report, for example. You can also talk about this idea that some people's heart rate doesn't really, if you're, for example, experiencing a freeze response when you encounter a stressor, your freeze response will actually lead to a lower heart rate, okay, and a drop in blood pressure because you're in shock. Okay, so that would obviously, that could be a disadvantage, or that could be a criticism of her using the heart rate as a way of measuring fear. Okay, so you can talk about this either, evaluate means you either talk about the strengths or weaknesses. So whichever one you do, as long as you mention one point and describe how heart rate is a good measure of fear or how heart rate is not a good measure of fear, you should be able to get the 2 marks there. Okay, so far from questions A to D, are there any questions or any issues or any confusions?
So Miss, if I ask for the reliability rather than validity, what would you say?
The reliability, if they were to ask you about the reliability, you would have to link it to, if, for example, this person, if Gemma was to do the study again in the future, how would the results be similar? We don't have enough data or enough information in this question. I think they didn't mention whether Gemma did the study again, but if they were to ask you about reliability, there'd be an extra line in the question somewhere about here. I'll just get my text box.
Miss, but wouldn't reliability be let's just say she conducted an experiment on a wider population. So can you say that that's tend to be her experiments more reliable in that way?
You could say that, but I think that would be more related to this idea of a valid methodology then, or a valid, you could say for both actually. But look, if they were to ask you about reliability, they'd need to give you some more detail. They'd need to say Gemma conducted the same experiments with another 30 participants and obtained similar results. So if you get a line like that where it indicates that she did the study again and she got similar results, well, then that's a clear indication that her results were reliable. Because remember, we said reliability is about the consistency, dependability, and stability of results. That if we do a study again, we get more or less similar results to the first time that we did that study. So we need more information here to be able to determine whether her results are reliable, but we have enough information from the scenario to determine whether her results are valid, because we've been given the specific measurements of how Gemma measured the change in phobic symptoms. Okay, and we've been given that both in the table here in a numerical form, as well as in a description in the sentence here that it's talking about the change in heart rate in beats per minute. Okay, so that's how we know that that information has been given to us, which means we have evidence there to make some kind of a decision about whether it's valid or not. If it said something like to measure phobic symptoms, Gemma simply asked the participants to describe how they felt, and heart rate wasn't even in the picture, well, then you would be evaluating this idea of a self-report. And then you'd be evaluating the validity of a self-report, indicating that even though self-reports give us rich detail about participants' experiences of their fear as they walked into the zoo, participants could have lied. Participants could have said that they weren't scared when they were actually really, really kind of shaking in their boots and really, really scared. So yeah, that's an alternative thing you could have been asked. Okay, but in this case, obviously, she's using heart rate as a clear measurement. So that's what we need to be evaluating there. Okay, so anyway, if we move on to the next part of the question, name the sampling method that Gemma used. So if we look at the sampling method that she used, basically, if we go up, we can see that she's conducting an experiment. She sends out an advertisement. So does anyone remember whenever we see the word advertisement or volunteered, in general, what type of sampling procedure are we talking about?
Convenience.
Yes, convenience. Good. So then all you're doing here is naming. So just write convenient sampling and you get 1 mark. Be careful, don't write convenient. It's convenience. Okay, E-N-C-E, not E-N-T. So that's the 1 mark there. And then name the experimental research design that Gemma used. What do you guys think? There are 3 separate groups. Okay, one of the groups is a placebo, but each of them contain different people. Okay, she randomly allocates them to 3 different groups. Sorry, say it again.
Is it independent?
Yeah, independent groups. Yeah, so you would just write here, independent groups design. Again, you don't have to describe this, you just need to name it. Okay, this is probably the hard question, talking about the differences in standard deviations between the groups and what this means for the averages reported in the table. It's a good idea to go back to your chapter 1 PowerPoint that we did and look at that basic idea of what a standard deviation is. When we were doing that, remember I told you guys that with the standard deviation, the closer that the number is, sorry, the smaller that the number is, the better it is in general, okay? The smaller the standard deviation is, the smaller is the variability or the range in terms of the results. Because when we're talking about standard deviation, remember we're talking about this idea that we've got like, we've got a normal distribution curve that's not even straight. Try that again. Better, okay. So that's our mean value, yeah? Right in the middle, that's our average. And standard deviation means that from the average value, how far do the results deviate or travel away? Okay, if you've got too much of a deviation or a difference, what that means is that your results are having too much variability. A little bit of variability is okay. Let's say we do a SAC, for example, in class. Let's say that the average was calculated to be, let's say 70%. Okay. If most of the results are ranging between 52 as the lowest result and then 70 in the middle, and let's say someone got about 90 as the highest, that's okay. There's not a lot of variability there, just about 20% on each end, yeah? So that's all right. If, however, we do SAC, and let's say the highest is still 90%, the average is, let's say 70%, but then we have people getting like 5%, 10%, okay? That is too much variability because the highest score is 90% and the lowest score is 5%. There's too much variability or range or difference there, which makes us think, okay, was someone sleeping during the SAC? Did someone cheat during the SAC? Was this class's SAC too easy compared to the other class's SAC? So it makes us start to realize that this set of results is unreliable compared to that set of results above, where the variation was a little less. Does that kind of make sense? Because that's the basic idea of what standard deviation is. It's about the variability or the difference within a specific set of results.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay, no stress. I'll explain this with reference to this actual data we have here. So when we're looking at the actual data here, you can see the average heart rate before the walk for the people in the systematic desensitization, so I'll write SD group, was 82. And then during the walk, when they were in the zoo, kind of seeing the birds face to face kind of thing, their heart rate has gone up, understandably, to 92, indicating that they were scared. Okay. The average change in heart rate is plus 10. So that's plus 10 beats per minute, or however they've measured that. Standard deviation is in the brackets here. So that's 3, that's 4. Okay. That indicates that there's not much of a variability because the numbers are quite low. And if you look at the difference between the two, so 3 and 4, there's not a big difference there in terms of the actual change that's occurred. So we would say that this is for more or less quite reliable. Okay, when we look at group 3, it's similar. They went from 4 to 3. Okay, their heart rate has still gone up. Okay, but the standard deviation is quite low. Okay, even though their heart rate has gone up a lot, there's not a lot of difference in terms of the standard deviation. Okay, so that indicates that there is less variability there. Group 2, however, group 2 has gone up as well by 27 beats per minute. So the heart rate has gone up, indicating that they are still scared. But you notice that the standard deviation, the difference between that is a lot higher. So you got a 40 standard deviation here, and you started with 20. Okay, which means that there's been a jump or an increase in 20 kind of like standard deviation, we could say, points there. Okay, so that's showing you that there's a lot more variability within group 2, indicating that the effect of the benzodiazepines, because remember, that's the benzodiazepines group. These are the guys that were on the benzodiazepines. So group 2 shows a lot more variability within the results, okay, indicating that maybe their benzodiazepines were not working the way that they should have. Maybe some of them were having different responses to that benzodiazepine medication, because there's a lot more variability within these results. Okay, so even though the actual total change in heart rate is just 27 points, when we look at the standard deviation, it gives us this idea that this group, even though this average change in heart rate was less than group 3, the results are actually more unreliable. Okay, because there's more variability. So basically, the more the standard deviation number is, or the change is in the standard deviation, the more unreliable that study is, or those results are. Okay, and the more
So group 2 is not reliable.
Sorry, say it again.
Group 2 is not reliable.
Exactly. Group 2's results are not reliable because you have a huge difference in standard
variation. Can you just say group 2's results are not reliable because there's a variation in the standard deviation?
You can say there's a bigger, like an increased variation in terms of the standard deviation point. So you could say starting at 20 and going all the way up to 40, which is a lot larger difference compared to group 1 and group 3. So you just have to compare it to the other groups as well in your answer, rather than talking about group 2 by itself. I think that's what the question was kind of asking us as well. If I just go back down, where did it go? Okay, part G. Yeah, so it's 4 marks. So those 4 marks basically come from you talking about group 2 having kind of like the largest difference in standard deviation, or the largest jump, and you indicating that just because it's a jump or an increase, that's not a good thing, because that actually increases the variability. And when you increase the variability, that is going to basically not give us a good indication of the final results there, or indicate that the increase in heart rate is not something that was completely attributed to the benzodiazepines alone. It might have been attributed to other factors there. So basically what that means, guys, is if we go back, this mean value here, or the average change in the heart rate, is not a reliable number compared to these two. It's like, for example, guys, if we link it back to our example with the SAC results, if I say, if let's say our class did a SAC, and let's say the average was 72%, yeah? And let's say another class did a SAC and the average was 62%, okay? Who has the higher average at the moment now? Just looking at these two results, is it class A or class B? Who's got the higher average there? The higher mean value? Class B.
B.
Yeah, so that's just looking at the mean alone. Now, let's say I calculated a standard deviation number on this mean. Let's say that for class A, the standard deviation was 1.2. But for class B, when I calculated standard deviation on the mean result, it was 3.3. Which class has a higher standard deviation now?
B.
Yeah, class B, because the number of that standard deviation, the difference or the number is higher in this. Is that a good thing?
No.
No. Okay, it's not a good thing because remember we said, and I'll just type this up, higher standard deviation means more means more variation, which means the mean value is not a reliable indicator of what it represents. Okay, of what it represents means in this case, we're representing psychology SAC scores. In Gemma's scenario here, we're representing change in heart rate. So in this case, guys, group 2, because the standard deviation change was a lot higher, okay, that means that this plus 27 average or mean change in heart rate is not reliable. We can't consider that as a reliable result, okay, which indicates a lot of potential confounding variables or other unwanted factors have affected group 2, which have not affected group 1 and group 3. Now, standard deviation, you're never going to be asked to ever calculate it. That's never, ever going to come up, but you will be asked to interpret it. Interpret it is what this question has asked you to do. It's given you the numbers and asked you to make a judgment of what those numbers actually mean, okay? Just remember, whenever the standard deviation is higher, that is bad. We don't want that. A higher standard deviation means a higher level of unreliability within the results and indicates that we can't use that mean value. We can't take that mean value seriously. We need to scrap it, okay? So that's what it means. Does that kind of make sense, guys? That's the basic idea. Okay, just remember that formula. The higher the standard deviation number is, or the higher the difference of the change is, the worse it is, or the worse it is for our results, because it indicates that the mean value is no longer reliable. Okay, the lower standard deviation is, the better it is for us, because it means that the variable, that the mean value is reliable. Okay, cool. Jana, was there any other part of that question that was that the main, like part G, was that the main part that was confusing?
Yeah, it was just that one. The rest were pretty good.
Yeah. Did that kind of make sense, what I just explained now, or do you want me to explain any part of it again?
No, that was perfect. I think I forgot about like the standard deviation being higher, being worse, and
yeah. Look, Vika haven't asked, like I think in one of the multiple choices one year, I think it was 2019 or 2018, they did ask about standard deviation in multiple choice. They haven't really asked it in short answer so far. Doesn't mean that they will never ask it. So it's a good thing that you've come across this question and you've looked at it. So yeah, just go through your chapter 1 PowerPoint, the slides on standard deviation. And I think there are a few examples in there as well that you can use to understand it better.
All right, perfect. Thank you.
No worries. Just looking at the rest of this question. Oh yeah, with the conclusion, guys, whenever you're writing a conclusion, just remember there are always 3 things that Vika expects you to include in a expects you to include in a conclusion. So if you did the Vika 2019 exam, you would notice that there was a question on conclusion. So you need to include the sample, you need to include the IV and the DV, and you need
the relationship between the IV and the DV.
Correct. So you need to include the relationship between the IV and the DV. So in other words, is the DV increased or is it decreased as a result of the IV? Okay. When you're writing your conclusions, if you mention or if you word it in such a way like this, there's no way you can't get the 3 marks, because that's how they mark the IV and DV. They first look at, okay, does this person have a sample? Does this person include the IV DV? Does this person include the relationship? That's where the 3 marks come from. Okay.
Miss, is this a common question?
Miss, can you can we do one?
The last time that this was included was in Vika 2019, I believe. So
higher chance we might have it.
Sorry, what was that, Zoya? I didn't hear you.
I said, can we do the conclusion together?
Oh, this one? Yeah, sure.
Yeah.
Okay, so if we go up, we just need 3 bits. Whoops. If we go up, we just need 3 bits of information there. So we're looking at the sample. So if we go up and we look at what the sample is, what do you guys think the sample is in this scenario?
30 participants.
Yes.
Which were
We can talk
randomly
about-
allocated to 3 different groups.
Yeah, but who are the participants in general?
3 different.
So they're participants with a specific phobia of birds.
Specific phobia of birds.
Yeah. So just try to make it related. And while we're actually looking at the scenario, let's just look at the IV and DV as well. So what do you guys think the IV and DV are? And then we'll combine everything together.
IV's intervention of specific phobia.
Yeah.
DV is searching for.
The DV would be the change in phobic symptoms. Yeah. And how we operationalize that is as measured by, oh, sorry, it's not a hypothesis. We don't need to operationalize. Okay. So we don't need to include that information. All right. So let's go back to our conclusion. Okay. What we would write here, let me just get my little text box thingy out. Where is it? Annotate text box. Okay, so what we can say here is that we can say that it can be concluded, or it was concluded. You don't even have to write it can be concluded, but we'll just include it. It can be concluded that patients with a specific phobia of birds. And then we just basically talk about the intervention. So remember, guys, there are 3 main interventions that were, or 2 main interventions, we would say. We're comparing systematic desensitization with benzodiazepines and placebo. That's why it's listed in that order. So we can talk about this idea that it can be concluded that patients with a specific phobia of birds who undergo systematic desensitization will, and then we think about, okay, what kind of effect did we see? Okay, I'll have to go up now again to show you guys that data. Whoops. Okay, so if we go up again, what kind of an effect did we see in terms of this, in terms of the interventions?
Increasing?
Okay, so average change in heart rate. So what do we think? Remember that the higher the number is here, the higher the faster the heart rate increase is. And the lower the number, the lower the rate of the increase is.
Okay.
So when we're talking about this, we can see in group 1 has the lowest number, yeah, it's +10. So when we're talking about group 1, we can say that their still heart rate has gone up, but it's gone up at a lower rate compared to group 3 and group 2, whose numbers are a lot higher, +27, +65. Yeah, so we can say that that is a lower rate. Even though it says +10, yes, it's gone up, but it's gone up at a lower rate, if that makes sense. Okay, so that's what we will basically write in our answer. So if I go back down, where is it? Okay, so yep, we include the sample. So we're going to write here, it can be concluded that patients or participants with a specific phobia of birds will show less phobic symptoms due to a lower heart rate, due to a lower pacing compared to. So what were the other 2 groups, guys? What are we comparing this group 1 to? Compared to participants who used what was group 2? What did they use? What kind of
Benzos?
Yeah, used a benzodiazepine
And a placebo?
Or a placebo. Yeah, that's it. So here you can clearly see that we've included the sample of participants. So we've said that it's participants with a specific phobia of birds. Okay, so that's 1 mark. We've talked about the interventions. We've mentioned, oh, sorry, I forgot to mention systematic desensitization. I don't know why I did that. The participants, okay, you know what? Let me just type that again. I don't know why I missed that. Okay, it can be concluded that participants with a specific phobia of birds who use systematic desensitization will show lower or less phobic symptoms Okay, placebo. So then that would be basically you could write it in less words than that as long as you've included all that information. So let's just scrap the one that we previously did, which didn't include the systematic. So cross that out. So this one does. So participants with a specific phobia of birds is our sample. So that's 1 mark. Systematic desensitization is another. Systematic desensitization, also mentioning the other interventions, is another mark. And then indicating the change or the relationship between the variables, talking about lower phobic symptoms or a lower overall increase in heart rate, will be the other mark here. Even if you didn't operationalize this variable and write lower overall increase in heart rate, even if you just wrote will show lower phobic symptoms compared to participants who used a benzodiazepine or placebo, you'll still get 3 marks there because they don't usually expect you guys to operationalize variables for conclusions. Okay, so that's pretty much where your 3 marks will come from there. Conclusions are actually easy ways to get marks as long as you include all those 3 elements that we talked about: the sample, statement of the IV and DV, as well as the relationship. And when we say relationship or the direction of effect, we're talking about using a word like increased or decreased, basically showing how does the IV affect the DV. Is there an increase? Is there a decrease? What happens, basically? Okay, so that's how we would do the conclusion. Does that make sense, guys?
So we don't have to use specific statistics in it to like.
No, you don't have to.
Okay.
Yeah. Specific statistics would be more if they asked you to analyze the results, which is very rare because we're not really asked to be able to, for example, except for the previous question with the standard deviation, that was a good example of that. But for conclusions, you never need to include results in them, like numerical results.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay.
Miss,
Yeah.
can you just explain what's systematic desensitization?
Yes, systematic desensitization is this idea, it's a psychological intervention that involves basically teaching someone a relaxation technique and then getting them to kind of be exposed to their phobia, but not all at once, like little by little. So if you're scared of dogs, for example, or if you're scared of let's say you're scared of dogs. I would start by showing you a cartoon of a dog. Then I would start by giving you like a little.
Oh, the steps, the step
yes,
by
the
step.
steps. Yeah. And then I would make sure that you go through each of those steps. And if you ever start having like, I don't know, a mini anxiety attack or panic attack in any of the steps, I would ask you to use the relaxation technique. So I continue running you through those steps until you get to the end. And basically the way in which we determine whether systematic desensitization is successful or not is you're able to get to the last step of that hierarchy and not show the conditioned fear response, or you would show another response like relaxation, for example. That's how we know that it's worked. Yeah, and obviously, because we're dealing with your thoughts and your feelings around the phobic stimulus, systematic desensitization is a type of psychological evidence-based intervention for specific phobia. Yeah. Whereas benzos, which is what group 2 went through, is a biological evidence-based intervention because it's a drug, just like an antidepressant or any kind of drug. It affects your neurotransmitters in your brain. It affects your brain chemistry there. Yeah. Okay, interesting question. You know, even though I uploaded the 2021 exam, I didn't actually properly look through it. So that's why I was shocked when I actually saw this 40 marks question, which is funny. But it's a good question, a good challenging question to be exposed to. Yeah.
It's good.
Yeah. Any questions, guys? I know that there's a few that I wasn't able to.
Miss, can we do like one more example?
One more example. Which example?
Not of this. One more example of a diagram, you know, the one that we did last time.
Yes, but I don't have one on me right now. If you want on Friday, oh sorry, not Friday. I have you guys on Wednesday, don't I? Maybe on Wednesday I'll try find one up and we'll go through that. Because I don't think I have one on me right now. I might have to look for it in the exams. Yeah, you mean the ones where we draw graphs, yeah?
Yes.
Okay, yeah, I'll find one. Hopefully there should be one somewhere in one of the exams. I'll find one and then we'll go through that on Wednesday.
Okay.
Yeah, no stress. And just bring
Yes.
any other questions you guys have on Wednesday, because on Wednesday we have a double period in the morning. So I'll just spend that mainly to go through any questions you guys have. Yeah. Yes, Safa, what
Miss,
was
I have
you saying? Yep.
Miss, Miss, do you want to stop the recording, or because then there's so much questions to watch on the video?
Oh yeah, true. Okay, I'll stop the recording here. It's 10:40 anyway.
No.